It's an emotional time when we first sit down at the Seder. It's a once-a-year occurrence for those of us in Israel, and we want it to be special and meaningful. This is where we're going to create memories for our family. I like to think that starting the Seder is like stepping into a time machine. We look at all the laws and customs of the Seder night, and we find that each one's connected to a different period of history. So sometimes in the Seder, we are slaves in Egypt, and sometimes we are Jews wandering in the desert, and sometimes we are free people dining in Jerusalem during the time of the temple and eating in the manner of the Romans. All the Jews throughout our long history who fought to observe Pesach over the years are there with us at the table. All the generations of our family are there with us at the table. We even experience events that haven't happened yet. The future days of the Geulah, the redemption. In one single night, we relive the entire history of the Jewish people and envision its future. And this idea is embedded in the Seder from the very beginning. Even before we reach the storytelling section of Magid, we begin the Seder with the Kiddush. On Shabbat, we say the Bracha of Mekadesh HaShabbat, and we praise Hashem for sanctifying the Shabbat. But on Chagim, we say Mekadesh Yisrael B'Hazmanim, thanking Hashem for giving Am Yisrael the ability to sanctify time. We're not Mekadesh the wine, we're Mekadesh the day. This is our first step in controlling time and our first step into the time machine, which is the Seder night. In the very first mitzvah that Am Yisrael was given while we were still in Egypt, we were given the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the month. By determining when Rosh Chodesh is, we determine when the holidays fall out. So as slaves in Egypt, the first mitzvah we were given was the gift of time. And this was the beginning of the end of slavery. A slave's time is not his own. He's at the beck and call of his master. Even when he has things that he wants to do for himself, the master's needs will always take priority. In contrast, freedom is the control of our time. We wake up in the morning and decide what we're doing with our day, how we will prioritize what we need to do. This is true for an individual, but also for a nation. Hashem commands Israel to create a Jewish calendar because as an independent nation, when we come out of Egypt, we should no longer march to the Egyptian rhythm. We shouldn't be celebrating Egyptian months and holidays. Instead, we should be creating a Jewish calendar with unique days of rest, of celebration, and memory. Controlling our time is the first act of freedom. So why do we travel through time at the Seder? Rav Soloveitchik says that in order to be masters of our own time, we must be in control of 3 stages of time. We must not just look back on history. We must experience it, like the Rambam says, B'chol dor vador, chayav adam l'harot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatza miMitzrayim. A person in every generation, we must show ourselves as if we too came out of Egypt. So we need to experience the past. We need to look forward to the future by expressing our hopes and our visions. And these 2 actions of looking back and looking forward should lead us to valuing our present and using it to express the values of the past and to strive towards the goals of the future. The primary criterion in distinguishing a free person from a slave is their relationship with time. Freedom is synonymous with a rich awareness of time. Slavery, on the other hand, is a passive state where the flow of time has no meaning. And Kiddush says this out loud. We sanctify the day and define its meaning. We proclaim this day as significant, as holy, as meaningful. We take ownership of time and use it as a way to connect with Hashem. And this is a quintessential act of Jewish freedom. Today, we often feel short of time and that time controls us. Kadesh reminds us that true freedom and self-respect is to master and control time for ourselves, to shape our lives in accordance with our values.
Shalom. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Karpas. Karpas at the Seder might seem like a small thing, but in fact, it's a significant symbol of what the Seder is about, namely educating our children and searching for moral messages for our time. A little bit of background. There are different minhagim for what people tend to eat for karpas. Some people eat celery, others potato, others parsley, and some even, I've heard, do French fries. The Talmud in Psachim explains a little bit more about what the purpose of karpas is. Even though the word karpas doesn't appear there, it talks about different kinds of vegetables that were brought to be dipped. And the idea in the Talmud seems to be that we should get the children to ask questions. Well, what sort of things should we be learning from this vegetable dipping? Like so much at the Seder, there is a bittersweetness to this mitzvah. One reason given for karpas is that, as you know, many have the minhag to dip it in salt water. This is based on what's called a notricon, a sort of acronym. The word karpas is associated with the number 60, samech parech. And the commentaries say that the name Karpas is a remez, a hint to the 60,000 men she'avdu ba'avodat parech. And so here we see that we're eating this vegetable with a more bitter taste as we dip it in the salt water. On a totally different note, the Bach and other commentaries teach that karpas symbolizes that this meal is like no other. It is a royal meal meant for bnei chorin. Just as at a meal for nobility or at a fancy wedding, we have a kabbalat panim, we have hors d'oeuvres, we just get a few finger foods and tastes to whet the appetite, and then later on the main course comes. That is what this part of the meal represents. It signals to us that we are in an elevated state, we are truly free. One final reason I'd like to share with you, which I think has great resonance for today. This is based on the commentary of Rabbeinu Manoach on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. He writes, "V'anu noagin b'karpas zecher lektonet hapasim she'asa Yaakov Avinu leYosef." How unusual, how surprising. The karpas, says Rabbeinu Manoach, is related to the ktonet pasim, the special coat that Yaakov had made for Yosef. And he goes on to say that it's because of this coat that we wound up in Mitzrayim. What is this based on? Well, there's a Rashi on the Torah about the ktonet pasim, which explains that the ktonet was made from karpas. What does that mean? Well, it turns out karpas elsewhere in Tanakh also means some kind of biblical clothing. And so here at the beginning of the Seder, we are urged to remember the discord between brothers, because over that little ktonet pasim, of course, the brothers then threw Yosef in a pit, and that's how he came down to be in Mitzrayim, and that led to our enslavement. So at the beginning of the Seder, we are remembering the discord which led to such suffering for our people. This year especially, telling our story must include this call to remember the dangers of divisiveness and the urgent need, even amid disagreement, to foster Ahavat Yisrael.
Yacha. On the night that we celebrate our freedom, we also give space to our brokenness. 3 matzot adorn our Seder table. The top one and the bottom one must be shleimot, complete, whole. But the middle one is broken. We cannot go on to the Magid, the feature part of Leil HaSeder, the part where we tell our story, without the broken matzah. The matzah itself, when we think about it, it's a dual symbol. It symbolizes 2 opposites. It's the bread of affliction, lechem oni, and it's the bread of redemption. It's the bread we ate when we were slaves, and it's the bread we ate when we were rushing to our freedom. The concept that these are 2 opposites, a paradox, if you will, within the same symbol, that, suggests Rabbi Sachs, is why we break the matzah in 2, to highlight that the matzah represents these 2 opposite themes. The concept of 2 opposites coexisting simultaneously is, interestingly, it's actually at the core of one of the successful therapy models called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. The fundamental idea of DBT is that in order for change to happen, I need to hold 2 opposites at the same time. One, that I accept myself as is. And 2, that there's something I would like to change. And in order for there to be successful change within this model, Successful change only happens when we first can find acceptance. And so we take our matzah at the Seder night and we break it into two pieces. We bite into the matzah and we taste the bitterness and the misery of slavery and the sweetness of liberation. The night of the Seder mirrors the human condition, which is full of paradoxes. To quote Rabbi J.J. Schachter, our lives at our core are combinations of servitude and redemption. We don't just live in the servitude, we live in the redemption. And we don't just live in the redemption, we live in the servitude. We live in both, end quote. And so we sit at our Seder table, and like the matzah, we are broken and we are whole.
Let's talk about Magid. With all due respect to the other aspects of the Seder, Magid is arguably the centerpiece of our evening. There are two mitzvot d'oraita, Torah-level laws, at the Seder. One is eating matzah, and the second is Sipor Yitziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of our exodus from Egypt. There are so many intricacies involved in Pesach. Why is the centerpiece of our Seder a story? I'd like to share a quote with you from Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Stories are an effective way to transmit meaning and identity. The Torah is not a dry, comprehensive legal code or a purely historical record, but rather a collection of stories through which the Jewish people understand their national past and create a future, an identity, and a moral and spiritual system through which to interpret the world. Stories can also be related to at every developmental stage, from the youngest child to the oldest, most scholarly adult. It is the ultimate pedagogy for transmitting national identity and values. While Pesach does indeed entail many complex mitzvot, the heart of the Pesach Seder is a story, because it transmits our identity and our values from one generation to the next. Our rabbis chose a very specific story to lie at the heart of Magid, and those are a few psukim from the book of Devarim that are called Mikra Bikurim, the declaration that was recited when farmers would bring their first fruits of the 7 species in the land of Israel to the Beit HaMikdash. They would bring their fruits to the Kohen, and they would recite these psukim that start with Arami Oved Avi. Our forefather was a wandering Aramean who went down to Egypt, where we became a large nation, and eventually were enslaved by Paro. We cried out to Hashem, who saved us and took us out of Egypt and brought us to the promised land of Israel. Why this particular story? Why is it featured in the Haggadah as the central part of Magid, which is the central part of the Seder itself? Well, for one reason, it's short. We wouldn't want to be at the Seder any longer than we already are. But number 2, it comprises our past, our present, and our future. It also has another important element of storytelling, which is that it begins with something unpleasant, or the shame, or the gnut, and it ends with something positive, coming into the land of Israel. I'd like to focus in on the idea of past, present, and future. At the Seder, it's often an intergenerational meal. We engage our children, we engage our parents. We're all involved in telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. However, we're not just telling a story. On the Seder night, it's as if we ourselves are coming out of Egypt. We're building our story as we go. In the Mikra Bikurim, we end with the psukim that describe how we come to Israel. And when we bring the first fruits, we celebrate with those around us for this amazing privilege and merit to be able to bring the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash. However, at the Seder, we stop before the psukim of coming into the land of Israel. On the Seder night, our story is yet unwritten. We have the potential to build anew our own Jewish identity. Together with our family that surrounds us at the Seder, we form our own story, our own morals, and our own values that make us the Jewish individuals, families, and nation that we want to be. Chag Sameach.
Motzi matzah, We have arrived at the point in the Seder where we eat the matzah. The Torah commands to eat matzah on Leil Seder. And there is an interesting requirement in this matzah, which we eat for the mitzvah on Leil Seder, that it should be shmura matzah. You go to the supermarket, you see boxes of matzah labeled kasher lePesach, and other boxes with a big sign on calling them shmura matzah to be used for Leil Seder. What is this shimur all about? It is derived from the pasuk in Parshat Bo, Ushmartem et hamatzot, and you should guard the matzot. And this phrase, Chazal learn from here that we should guard the matzah meticulously to make sure that it does not become chametz. The Gemara in Pesachim discusses this shimur, in particular discussing from when in the process of making the matzah do we need to guard the grain or the flour. For example, Rava suggests that we need to guard the grain from the time of ktsira, harvesting. Whereas it's clear from the continuation of the Gemara, and many Rishonim say we only need to guard the grain from the time of tchina, grinding. They grind the grain with a water mill, and at that point when the grain is coming into close contact with the water, there's a danger that we may have some chametz forming here, so we have to meticulously watch it. Either way, this guarding is clearly for the perspective of making sure that we don't have chametz developing. But what is the chiddush here? Meaning every matzah that we have on Pesach obviously has no chametz in it. And we have guarded it to some extent to make sure that there's been no chametz. So what is the novel idea here behind this shimur? It may be that we have to start guarding the grain from an earlier stage in the process, as we suggested. But there is another aspect that is clear in some phrases in the Gemara, and definitely from Rashi's understanding of the Gemara. We have to do this shimur so that we are making the matzah with the intention of doing it l'shem mitzvah. We have to have the intention here of making this matzah for the mitzvah of eating matzah on Leil Seder. And this intention adds real meaning to the process, and it turns the matzah into a chefza shel mitzvah, an object that has been made dafka to do a mitzvah with. And if we follow this second aspect of the shimur as well, then of course there will be several nafkaminot. I'll throw out one. For example, a non-Jew or a katan, a minor, cannot make such a matzah. Because even if there is an adult Jew standing there watching, supervising, ensuring that the matzah does not turn into chametz, the non-Jew and arguably the katan as well cannot turn the matzah into an object to be used for a mitzvah. They cannot have that intention. And therefore, we have shmura matzah to ensure it doesn't become chametz, to ensure that it has been made with the intention of being used for a mitzvah on Leil Seder. And this meaning that we imbue into our matzah really reminds me of the Mechilta and its comment on the phrase Ushmartem et hamatzot. The Mechilta says don't read it as matzot, but rather as mitzvot, an anagram for matzot. Guard the mitzvot, so that if a mitzvah comes your way, grab it quickly. Don't let the opportunity be lost. And may we this Pesach guard our matzot and guard likewise all our mitzvot, and do them with enthusiasm, with love, with eagerness, and with, please God, a lot of merit for all of Am Yisrael.
Why do we eat maror, bitter herbs, on Seder night? You could say it's because we want to remember how the Egyptians made our lives bitter in Egypt. Vayamaru et chayehem ba'avodah kasha, the Torah tells us, and they made their lives bitter with hard work. And you'd be right. But the original mitzvah to eat maror was instituted as a side dish for the matzah and korban pesach. As the Haggadah says, al matzot umrorim yochalu hu. You should eat your korban pesach with matzah and maror. Today, when we do not have the Beit HaMikdash to bring the korban pesach, one could say we might as well not eat the maror either. But of course we do, and we know that it's mainly because we are committed to seeing ourselves as if we left Mitzrayim with our ancestors thousands of years ago. But another aspect of Seder night is making the story relevant to our own lives and to actively engage our children in the process. So let's take a closer look at the concept of maror as a modern day prop. Many people use romaine lettuce as their maror. The Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Amud Lamed Tet, says that the Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Lamed Tet, says that lettuce is a preferred form of maror because it starts out rach and becomes kashet. In other words, it starts out sweet but leaves a bitter aftertaste. This progression can be compared to the way the Jews became slaves in Egypt. At first, Paro and the Egyptians were kind and welcoming. Then, little by little, they took away our freedom until we were entirely oppressed. In addition to this nasty trick of the Egyptians, there's a deep element of bitterness or disappointment in ourselves for not being aware of what was happening all along, and a feeling that we may have gotten ourselves into this mess in the first place. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, works like the Egyptians. It dupes you into doing something that you may have known was wrong, but you let yourself be dragged down. But from that bitter slavery, we cried out to Hashem, and He redeemed us. The Gemara points out that the Hebrew word for lettuce is chasa, mercy. Dechas rachmana ilavan. Hashem had mercy on us. And now we have the opportunity to learn from the past and apply its lessons going forward. With Jewish history as our textbook and the Torah as our guide, we will hopefully arrive at a sweeter destination. We will hopefully have the strength to stand up to temptations that lead us astray. Still, you might say, this is supposed to be a holiday. Why do I need to think about bitter mistakes of the past tonight? To this we can answer, there's an idea of positive bitterness. No journey can succeed without some discomfort to push you forward. Think of a baby learning to walk or a child riding a bike. How many times will they fall or falter before they succeed? As Jews, we know that the same is true of our spiritual journey. We make strides, but sometimes we falter and lose our way. In our relationship with Hashem, we know that the effort is often as important as the outcome, that when we reach out to Him, He will come to meet us halfway, and that spiritual connection is key to being free. When you eat the maror this year, think about the struggles in your life, physical or spiritual, but don't get stuck on the bitterness. Keep plowing forward to reach the victory or success that lies just beyond. Freedom tastes sweeter on the heels of a struggle. And one more thing. Pesach is the holiday that marks the birth of our nation, when we became more than just a random group of individuals. We became Am Yisrael. This adds a collective aspect to our lives. So this Pesach, in addition to assuaging your own bitterness, take a moment to share in the struggles of others. Think of our hostages. Think of our soldiers. Think of their families. Think of all of Am Yisrael. Struggles are so much easier to bear when we all carry a piece of it. Think of ways you can alleviate our national struggle. Think of turning bitter words into sweet gestures, demonstrations of division into rallies of reunion. Dream of the unity that will neutralize the bitterness and pave the way for our ultimate redemption and freedom.
Every Seder table I've been at has on it 3 matzot, which is kind of strange because, as we know, every Shabbat, a Yom Tov table only needs 2 loaves to fulfill Lechem Mishnah, the double portion of man that fell before Shabbat, and Chagim in the desert. On the most basic halachic level, if we already know we are going to break one during Yachatz at the Seder, then the 2 remaining matzot, the upper and lower, will represent the Lechem Mishnah. So during Yachatz, we break the third, the middle matzah, in 2 and raise the smaller piece for halachma. We then put aside the larger piece for tzafun, otherwise known as the afikoman, later in the Seder. This third piece of matzah, the middle matzah, represents the obligation to eat lechem oni on Seder night, poor man's bread, otherwise known as matzot. And since poor man's bread is not whole, we will proceed to break this third piece of matzah. But what is the deeper meaning of breaking this piece of matzah, the yachatz? Rabbi Sachs in his Haggadah explains 3 reasons. The first relates to this concept of lechem oni, the bread of a poor person, one who is so poor that he does not know where his next meal is coming from, does not eat all his food at once. He divides it into 2, saving half for later. I'm reminded at this point of the testimony of Eli Sharabi, recently released from 491 days of captivity in Gaza. He says, I was fed a piece of pita a day, maybe a sip of tea. Hunger consumed everything. They beat me, they broke my ribs. I didn't care. I just wanted a piece of bread. There was never enough food. Sometimes, if we begged enough, we would get something extra. We had to choose an extra piece of pita or a cup of tea. Sometimes they threw at us dry dates, and it felt like the greatest gift in the world. When we break the middle matzah this year, not only will our minds be cast back to our slavery in Egypt, to the poor among us, but also to this poor man's bread that our hostages are forced to endure right now. The second reason Rabbi Sachs brings is that with the destruction of the temple, matzah takes the place of the Korban Pesach. Just as that lamb was eaten at the end of the meal so as to be experienced as holy food, not just as food eaten to satisfy hunger, so we break the middle matzah, eat some part now, and reserve half this matzah, the afikoman, to be eaten at the end of the meal in the spirit of the Korban Pesach, symbolizing our future redemption. The third reason takes us deeper into this seemingly strange action. Matzah is referred to in two apparently contradictory ways in the Haggadah. As we mentioned, it is referred to as lechem oni, the bread of oppression our fathers ate in the land of Egypt, and later on in the Seder, it is referred to as the bread of freedom. So which is it, and how can it be both? Ibn Ezra explains that slaves were given unleavened bread because, being hard, it takes longer to digest. It removes hunger for longer than ordinary bread, hence the bread of oppression. Breaking the matzah at the beginning of Magid hints at our time of brokenness. When we begin the Seder, we are broken. We experience ourselves as enslaved in Egypt. Later in the Seder, we describe it as the bread of freedom, the bread the Israelites ate as they were leaving Egypt, leaving in too much of a hurry to allow the dough to rise. Qualitatively, it's the same bread. The difference between freedom and slavery lies not in the quality of bread we eat. Both the lechem oni and the lechem cherut are the same matzah, but in the state of mind in which we eat it. On Seder night, once we've relived the Exodus, the lechem oni becomes the lechem cherut, the bread of freedom. We divide the matzah, therefore, to show that it contains within it these two symbolisms. And lastly, what happens to the larger piece of matzah after we break it into two? If our kids don't manage to snatch it from us right there and then and claim it, we hide it and we eat it later on as the afikoman. As mentioned before, for us today, the afikoman is eaten in place of the Korban Pesach, which was the main symbol of Hashem's Yeshua, salvation. Hiding the afikoman during Yachatz, therefore, alludes to our redemption being hidden, embedded, even in our toughest moments during our brokenness. Nevertheless, it is at this very moment, amidst the brokenness and struggle, that we cast our minds to a better time, to a future of Geula. And in the vein of this symbolism, and to relate it to our current reality of Am Yisrael, as we endure an ongoing, painful and difficult war, we are reminded that the larger of the two pieces of matzah is the hidden one. We hold on to this tefillah that the reality that awaits us as a nation, though hidden right now, may be even greater than what we might have expected. What do? Not only do we cast our minds to a better future, not only do we daven and pray, we send out the future generation to go out looking for this afikoman, this geula. We are proactive, forward-thinking. We don't sit back and wait, but we go out looking and believe that it will be through our seeking, tzipita l'Yeshua, that our actions, these better days, this geula, will come.
Shulchan Orech, setting a table of freedom and reflection. One of my favorite parts of the Pesach preparations is laying the table, and I usually do it a couple of days before Seder night. I don't go overboard with themes, but I do love thinking of new ideas for centerpieces and place settings and games. And yes, I'm also the person who lays the Shabbat table on a Thursday. It helps me get in the right mindset, and it's always a relief to see that at least one thing is done. This year, we can't lay the table a couple of days in advance because Pesach starts on Motzei Shabbat. But on the bright side, we'll all pitch in together right after Shabbat ends to create a beautiful table for the Seder. So what are we preparing the table for? The meal we're setting the table for is the Shulchan Orech, the festive meal of the Seder. The term Shulchan Orech literally means set table, and it's an important part of the evening, deserving of special attention. The 10th step of the Seder, it's not just a break for food, it comes right between the 4 cups of wine, with 2 cups before it and 2 afterwards, and is also sandwiched between 2 different parts of Hallel. This special position shows us that this isn't just another Yom Tov meal, it's something more meaningful. But why should we make such an effort to set the table beautifully for this section? Let's look at what the Rambam says in Hilchot Chametz Umatzah, chapter 7. He explains that on the night of the Seder, each person should feel like they have just left Egypt. It's not just remembering the past, but reliving the experience of liberation now. The Rambam goes further and says that while leaning during this meal is not an obligation, like when drinking the 4 cups of wine, it's considered praiseworthy to lean while you eat. The Rambam sees the leaning as a reminder that we have just been freed. The Shulchan Aruch picks up on this too, advising that we set the table with the very best utensils we can afford to honor the occasion. Setting a beautiful table isn't just for aesthetics, it's about experiencing freedom in the most uplifting and spiritual way possible. When it comes to the meal itself, the Talmud in Chagiga teaches that the table is like an altar. Eating at the Seder, then, can be seen as a form of offering, a way of connecting spirituality with the themes of redemption and freedom. There are some halachic guidelines about Shulchan Aruch too. We have to be mindful of how much we eat and how much we drink at this meal. The Mishnah in Pesachim 108 says we shouldn't overeat so that we can still have room for the afikoman. It also discusses the rules around being able to drink between the first 2 cups, but not in between the 3rd and 4th cups. And the Beit Yosef explains that the Mishnah is telling us that one is only allowed to drink between the 2nd and 3rd cups, i.e. during the meal. But one must avoid overindulgence, which could lead to becoming drunk and unable to read the Haggadah. This is the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, as well as that of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, let's talk about some of the foods we eat during Shulchan Aruch. In the Torah's description of the Passover feast, the main course used to be roasted lamb, the Korban Pesach. We can't do that today, but there are customs to symbolize it. In my own family, Ashkenazim, we always eat an egg in salt water as the first part of the meal, and everyone loves it. The Rambam gives 2 main reasons for this custom. First, the egg symbolizes mourning, because Pesach falls on the same day as Tisha B'Av in the Jewish calendar, the day of the destruction of the temple. This egg is a reminder of the loss of the Beit HaMikdash and the Korban Pesach that we can no longer offer. The second reason, on the other hand, is from the Mishnah Berurah, who cites the Gra and suggests that the egg is not for mourning, but to represent the Korban Chagiga, the festival offering that was brought with the Korban Pesach during temple times. The egg's round shape symbolizes the cycle of life, renewal, and the continuity of the Jewish people through difficult times. It's also dipped in salt water, which represents the tears of the Israelites during their slavery. The salt water contrasts the bitterness of our past suffering with the egg as a hope for renewal and freedom. The egg is truly a multi-layered symbol, reminding us both of what we've lost and what we've gained, and it connects to the broader themes of the Seder. Another custom at this meal is not to eat roasted meat during Shulchan Aruch. This is based on the Talmud in Pesachim, which notes that the Korban Pesach was specifically roasted, so it's avoided at the Seder to prevent any confusion. Some people also avoid any roasted meat that would require shchita, like roasted chicken, but they may eat other roasted foods like fish or eggs. Although most of us no longer roast meat in the same way they did in temple times, many continue the custom of refraining from eating roasted meat during the meal. Ultimately, while we're not eating a Korban Pesach, these customs serve as reminders of what we've lost, the temple and the Korbanot, but they also highlight the freedom and joy we now have to celebrate our redemption. To end, I'd like to share an insightful idea from Erica Brown's new Haggadah Seder talk. She contrasts the earlier, more chaotic parts of the Seder, the breaking of the matzah, the questions, the storytelling, with the orderliness of Shulchan Aruch. The Magid section reflects the disarray and struggle of our people's journey, but Shulchan Aruch represents redemption, order, and beauty. By setting a beautiful table, we move from chaos to joy, from pain to freedom. Chaos and order together are critical for redemption, she writes. As we set the table for Shulchan Aruch, we're not just preparing a meal, we're creating a space where joy and reflection can coexist, and where we can truly appreciate the freedom we've earned. Chag Sameach.
Hi. I'm going to be speaking about Tzafun, otherwise known as Let's Hunt for the Afikoman. An interesting issue. There are lots and lots of discussions in the commentaries and in the halakha about what the Afikoman is. What's its name? Why is its name? How much of it do we eat? When do we eat? But why this part of the Haggadah is called Safun? Not so much. The minhag of children extorting the adults for wonderful loot is a relatively recent one and actually came into being after the name of this part of the Haggadah already was existing. So what is tzafun? What is hidden? So I wanted to share with you an idea from Harav Soloveitchik in his writings on Pesach. He writes that there are two different types of freedom when one is a slave. One of them is freedom through conquest. What is freedom through conquest? What it sounds like. Somebody is stronger, somebody comes and physically removes you from bondage. That's great. That's wonderful. Except that doesn't necessarily have any permanence. It's very physical, but the question is, what kind of person do you remain on the inside? And can this freedom be taken away? There's another kind of freedom, which is called freedom through sanctity. And he brings the example of having a slave go to the mikveh or laying tefillin. The idea being freedom through sanctity is when you make an effort to change your very essence, to change who you are. You have sanctified your life. You've taken your life in a different direction. That kind of freedom can never, ever be taken away because it has involved a concrete change in your very being. Now, it is true that on this night, we discuss the 10 plagues. We sing the praises for Hashem at the splitting of the Red Sea. But before all of that could happen, a sanctity, a freedom from sanctity had to occur first. What was that? That was the Korban Pesach. That was the Pesach sacrifice. Am Yisrael, by keeping the mitzvot that Hashem gave us about eating the Pesach sacrifice, painting the doorposts with the blood of the animal, that meant that we elevated ourselves that night through our actions because we sanctified our being and gave ourselves over to Hashem. And it was only after that sanctity, it was only after that freedom from sanctity that the freedom from conquest could happen. Hashem removing us with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. All of the signs and wonders. All of those could happen because of the fact that we first achieved freedom through sanctity. And that freedom, the one through sanctity, that can never, ever be lost. The Abarbanel writes in his Haggadah of Pesach that, yes, us as God's people, we have been through much. We have suffered terribly. We have had many challenges through the millennia. But our identity as Am Yisrael, that destiny that Hashem gave us, that can never, ever be taken away. That is ours forever. That is our freedom. That is our legacy from Yetziat Mitzrayim, and it will always be ours. It is said that we are not supposed to eat anything after tasting the afikoman. You're allowed, not including the 2 cups of wine and the water, so that we keep the taste of the afikoman in our mouth. So may it be that this year, that the taste of the afikoman in our mouth reminds us of the power that we have to transform who we are. And that this night, when we sit around the Seder table and we speak, it's not only a physical representation, but it is also a reminder of the internal transformation and the freedom through sanctity that our forefathers were able to achieve, and that we are capable of achieving that as well. Chag Sameach.
The Hallel that we say at the Seder is very different from the Hallel that we say the rest of the year. On all other times of the year when we say Hallel, we generally say Hallel during the day. At the Seder, we say it at night. On all other times of the year when we say Hallel, we make a bracha. The Hallel that we say at Seder night is without a bracha. On all other times of the year when we say Hallel, we say that women are exempt from Hallel because it's a mitzvah taseh shazman grama. It's a time-dependent mitzvah. At the Seder, women have an obligation to recite Hallel. On all other times of the year when we say Hallel, we say it as one continuous block. At the Seder, we say the first part before the meal and the second part after the meal. And on all other times of the year when we say Hallel, we say it standing. At the Seder, we say it sitting down. Why is the Hallel that we recite at the Seder so different than the Hallel that we say the rest of the year? To answer that question, we need to delve more deeply into the reasons that we say Hallel during the rest of the year. The Gemara in Erchin, Daf Yud, Amud Aleph, and Amud Bet, explains that there are 18 days of the year when we recite Hallel. We recite Hallel on the 8 days of Sukkot, the 8 days of Hanukkah, the first day of Pesach, and the first day of Shavuot. And the Gemara establishes principles for when we say Hallel. It explains that we say a full Hallel on days that the Torah prohibits work, on days that have the status, the Torah designation of Moed, a sanctified festival, and we say full Hallel on days when the Torah, on days that have a unique korban that was brought in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. And so the Gemara asks, what about Hanukkah? Hanukkah only meets one of those criteria. It has a unique korban that was brought in the Beit HaMikdash, but it's not a moed, and it has no Torah prescription against malacha. And the Gemara answers that Hanukkah is different. We say Hallel on Hanukkah to commemorate a miracle. The Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, explains that there's another time when we say Hallel. We say Hallel historically, Jews would say Hallel when they faced grave danger and God redeemed them. They said Hallel as a spontaneous expression of gratitude. And so the Gemara teaches us that the Jewish people recited Hallel at Yam Suf, when God parted the seas for us. The Jewish people burst into joy and thanksgiving by reciting Hallel in the time of Yehoshua, when the kings of Canaan attacked. The Jewish people burst into joy singing Hallel. Devorah and Barak bursted into joy and sang Hallel after Sisera attacked them. Chizkiyahu burst into Hallel when Sancherib attacked. Michael, Azariah, and Hananiah sang Hallel when they were attacked by Nebuchadnezzar, and Mordechai and Esther burst into joy singing Hallel at the time when Haman was poised to destroy them. And so Rav Chai Gaon in Tshuvot HaGaonim, Shari Tshuva, Kuf Bet, is quoted as saying that the Hallel that we sing at Leil HaSeder is a Hallel of Shirah. It is a spontaneous expression of joy upon our redemption from Mitzrayim. And this makes sense because right before Hallel, in the Haggadah, we say, Leficha chayav adam lirot et atzmo or laharot atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim, that one must show himself, present himself as though he himself came out of Egypt. And that is why we eat matzah, and that is why we eat maror, and that's why we have salt water to reenact Yetziat Mitzrayim. And so when we come to Hallel, at the time when we recite Hallel, we have just finished the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and we relive Yetziat Mitzrayim by saying Hallel, because we're now out of Egypt, and we are feeling tremendous joy and gratitude to Hashem for saving us. And that's why there is no bracha before Hallel, because this Hallel is a Hallel of joy. It's an expression of thanksgiving, commemorating what happened when we left Mitzrayim, women are obligated to say Hallel at Leil HaSeder because they were also participated in the miracle of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and they also burst into joy at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and so they are obligated to commemorate the joy that they experienced when we were redeemed from Egypt. We say Hallel at night at the Seder because that's when the miracle occurred, and we say Hallel with the meal in between to demonstrate that this is a special kind of meal. It's a meal that has Hallel on either side of it. It's not just a typical Yom Tov meal, but it is a meal that of thanksgiving, of gratitude. And so this year, when we recite Hallel, we not only reenact the joy, the spontaneous expression of joy of Am Yisrael as they came out of Egypt, but I personally will be remembering the many Nisim and Niflot that Hashem has granted us in the past year. And may we continue to be worthy of these Nisim, Niflot, and Geula Shlema. Chag Sameach.
Nirza. It's been a long night, and we've done a lot of things, a lot of mitzvot, a lot of things that we have to do. There's been Arba Kosot, there's been Matzah and Maror and Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and there's been Hallel. And now we're at Nirza. And Nirza, there's nothing we have to do. Nirza, we're here because we want to be here. Nirza, we're here because we want this to last a little bit longer. It's been monumentous. It's been exciting. It's been a chance to live Yetziat Mitzrayim again. And we don't want to leave. We don't want to leave the Seder table. We don't want to continue with our lives. We want to stay with the Shechina a little longer. And that, just one more, reminds me of my son asking for one more hug before he goes to sleep. So, what do? We sing. What do we sing about? We sing about Pesach. We sing about miracles. We sing about our connection with God. And at the very end, we sing Chad Gadya. We get to that last little goat that ends off the Seder. And why does that last one end off the Seder? What's the piyut that we say in Nirza? Chasar Sidor Pesach k'ilchato, kechol mishpato v'chukato, kasher zachilu lesader oto, ken nizke la'asoto. Originally, this appeared at the end of a very long piyut explaining all of the halachot of Leil HaSeder. It was a summary of all the mitzvot that was written in the 11th century. Sometime in the 500 years that followed, it got moved into the Haggadah itself. And what we were saying in this piyut was said on Shabbat HaGadol. It was a few days before Pesach. We were saying, just as we've gone over all of the halachot, we should have the zchut lekayem et mitzvot. Kasher zachilu lesader oto, ken nizke la'asoto. But by putting it in the Haggadah, we're giving it another meaning. We're saying, just like we've had the Seder tonight, ken nizke la'asoto. What are we going to do? We're going to do the Korban. When are we going to do the Korban? Zach shochen me'ona. That's the Shechina. Komem kehal hadat mimana is going to raise up Am Yisrael. Bekarov nahel nitei chana, and lead Am Yisrael. Peduyim leTzion berina. Going to bring us to Tzion, to Yerushalayim, in the Geula Shlema. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya.